Charles Oliveira vs Islam Makhachev is going to be legendary. With a win over Islam Makhachev, not only could Charles Oliveira be considered the lightweight GOAT, but he can also have an opportunity to get matched up against Khabib Nurmagomedov. And a win for Islam Makhachev would bring the belt back to Dagestan, setting up for an absolutely legendary matchup. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Charles Oliveira vs Islam Makhachev are set to face off this Saturday at UFC 280, and this is a matchup that I've personally been anticipating for a long time. This is such a great stylistic matchup, and I see paths for victory for both of these guys. For Charles Oliveira, I think he can win in multiple ways, both on the feet and on the ground. And what makes Oliveira so great on the feet is how diverse he is. In terms of his punches, he has a really nice jab, he has a nice uppercut, cross, hook. He just has phenomenal boxing out there overall, and not only is he very diverse, he also has a ton of power in those hands, as he was able to knock out Michael Chandler, who has a pretty decent chin, and he was able to knock down Justin Gaethje, who has a phenomenal chin as well. But probably the most impressive thing to me personally about his striking is how technical he is. He's never off balance. If he throws a power shot, he's immediately right back on balance, which of course is extremely important in any fight, but especially when you're facing a wrestler like Islam Makhachev, it's going to be even more important in this, because if you're off balance, you're more susceptible to getting taken down. But as I mentioned, Charles Oliveira isn't only a boxer out there. In the clinch, he has phenomenal elbows that he throws to the head. He also has phenomenal knees that he throws to the body that really eat away of that gas tank of his opponent, and I feel like we really saw that utilized perfectly in that Dustin Poirier fight, as those knees to the body really hurt Dustin Poirier. But besides that, Charles also has phenomenal kicks to the legs, phenomenal kicks to the body with that straight front kick, also has great kicks to the head, and overall he's just extremely diverse, as I mentioned, and he has a ton of power in every limb. And the great thing about Charles is he's also phenomenal on the ground, as he has tremendous jiu-jitsu. Charles does a phenomenal job at seemingly always finding the submission no matter what position he's in. If he has your back, the fight is basically always over. He's going to get a rear naked choke or something of the sort, unless you're Michael Chandler. He was the only guy who was able to have Charles Oliveira on his back and not get submitted, so props to him for that. If he has mount, he can basically do whatever he wants. He can jump on the arm and try to get an arm bar. He can go for some sort of choke. He can go for a Kimura. He can literally do whatever he wants with that position. And overall, Charles Oliveira is just extremely dangerous, as he does have the most submissions in UFC history by a wide margin as well. Now, although Charles is phenomenal on the ground, he's certainly not going to be looking to take the fight to the ground, as Islam Makhachev is a phenomenal wrestler. But he can certainly utilize that jiu-jitsu to finish the fight if he does happen to find himself on the ground. And there's also going to be an opportunity for Charles to quickly jump on the neck if Islam goes for a takedown from distance. We saw this specifically in the Kevin Lee fight, where Kevin went for a takedown from decently far away, and Charles immediately jumped on the neck and ended up submitting Kevin Lee. And we could certainly see something similar if Islam isn't careful enough when shooting in for takedowns. And I 100% could see Charles Oliveira getting submission that way. So overall, I think Charles Oliveira can get a win on the feet by knocking down or even knocking out Islam and then finishing on the ground if he doesn't knock him out. Or I also think Charles Oliveira can get the job done on the ground by getting a submission. There certainly is a possibility that Charles Oliveira could win by decision, but I just don't think it's all that likely. The way Charles fights with that all-out pressure just doesn't make it all that likely for this fight to go to decision. And if history tells us anything, Charles Oliveira gets wins by finishes. But now let's move on to Islam Makhachev. How could he get a victory in this matchup? Now, unlike Charles, I feel like there's a lot less methods of victory for Islam Makhachev. I feel like the most likely case scenario, if he were to win, would be he would take Charles to the ground and just dominate him for 5 rounds. by just having mount or having dominant positions for 5 rounds and throwing those ground and pound shots. Now, of course, there is a possibility he can get a finish with that style as well. That certainly is possible, but I feel like it is more likely that he would win by decision with that style. Now, could Islam submit Charles Oliveira? Of course, that is a possibility. Islam does have a pretty nice submission game, and Charles Oliveira has been submitted in the past, but that was before Charles Oliveira turned into the Charles Oliveira that we know today. This Charles has absolutely no quit in him, him, and he's extremely talented. And when you match those two things together, you're talking about an extremely dangerous fighter. Now, on the feet, is it possible that Islam hurts Charles bad and jumps on him and gets a finish that way? Yeah, that certainly is a possibility, as Charles is very hittable, but Islam isn't as good of a striker as a Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje, and he definitely doesn't have the same power as a Michael Chandler, for example. So I feel like compared to those three most recent matchups, Charles has a lot less to worry about on the feet, although I do think Islam is a very underrated striker. He's just not on the level of those other guys, and he certainly doesn't have the power of Michael Chandler. Now, by the way, I don't want to make it seem like I don't think Islam Makhachev has a chance, because I certainly think he does. I think this is a very, very close fight. I'm just making the argument that in terms of paths of victory, Charles certainly has more. And who knows, maybe I could be completely wrong and Islam ends up knocking out Charles Oliveira on the feet, but I just don't think that's all that likely. But now, let's get into my official prediction for this matchup. So as I mentioned, this is an extremely close fight, but my official prediction is Charles Oliveira by a finish. I think he can get a submission on a takedown attempt by Islam Makhachev, and I also think he can get a submission on the ground, maybe off his back, or even in mount, of course. But I also think there's a very legitimate possibility that Charles Oliveira catches Islam Makhachev with a perfectly thrown punch, or maybe even a head kick. That either A, completely knocks out Islam Makhachev, or B, hurts him enough to fall to the ground, and Charles just finishes it from there. I just think the diversity and skill level alongside with the heart is just going to be too much for Islam Makhachev in the end, and I do see Charles Oliveira winning this fight. But of course, as I mentioned, this is an extremely close matchup, and I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if Islam Makhachev ends up winning. But of course, as I said, my official prediction would be Charles Oliveira by a finish. Now, I know that prediction is pretty broad, but I just see so many different ways for Charles to get a victory. So I'm going to play it safe and just say finish rather than a submission or a TKO. But one thing I can say confidently is I'm extremely excited for this matchup and the rest of the card as well. I think this is certainly the best card of the year and probably one of, if not the best cards I've ever seen watching the sport. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Charles Oliveira is going to win this matchup against Islam Makhachev, or do you think Islam's going to win? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.